Welcome to the English Tales, where every story whispers a little magic and every word weaves a world of wonder. Settle in and let the tales begin. Today, listen to Hamlet by William Shakespeare. A beautiful country lay some distance from Denmark, where King Hamlet ruled. He married a very beautiful princess, and both loved each other deeply, always ready to sacrifice their lives for one another. After their marriage, the queen gave birth to a son named Prince Hamlet. From childhood, he loved his father more than his mother. King Hamlet had a younger brother named Claudius, who lived with them. They lived a happy life. Under King Hamlet's rule, the kingdom was prosperous, and he did many things for the welfare of his people, who were grateful to have such a good king. One day, a terrible incident occurred. King Hamlet passed away. Only Claudius knew the cause of his death. With tears in his eyes, he announced that the king had been killed by a poisonous serpent. The news of Hamlet's death struck the people like a bolt of lightning. The subjects loved their king dearly, and the news plunged them into deep sorrow. A wave of mourning spread throughout the kingdom. The most affected was Prince Hamlet. He loved his father deeply and spent most of his time with him. His young heart was completely broken. Tears constantly flowed from his eyes, and he lost his appetite, sleep, and peace of mind. He was occasionally consoled to sleep, but would wake up in the middle of the night calling for his father. He would spend the entire night turning in his bed or crying. 2 months passed in this manner, but Hamlet's grief was still fresh. He could not forget his father, and would go to his room and cry for hours. Just when he had not recovered from his sorrow, he received a shocking piece of news. The same mother who had loved his father so much, who was ready to sacrifice everything for him, had married his uncle Claudius. This marriage had been kept a secret from him. This marriage was highly inappropriate. The queen was a beauty, while Claudius was dark, unattractive, and odd-looking. There was nothing in him that seemed worthy of the queen or the throne. But Hamlet was the only one who saw this. The queen had turned a blind eye to it. The queen had quickly agreed to the marriage, which hurt Hamlet the most. His father had passed away only 2 months ago, and yet his mother had remarried. Where had the love she once had for his father gone so quickly? This question tormented Hamlet. One day, as Hamlet sat in his room, reflecting on the events of the past few months, a thought struck him. Could there be some conspiracy behind this marriage? He began to connect the dots and thought, first my father died from a serpent's bite, but only Claudius knew about it. Then, a few days later, he and my mother got married. Could it be that they are behind my father's death? Did they kill him in the form of a serpent? The lust for the throne can force even the best of people to commit wicked deeds. They must have killed my father for the throne and now want to take over the kingdom. The more Hamlet thought, the more tangled his thoughts became. His health deteriorated from overthinking. His body became emaciated, his face pale, and his eyes sunken. People no longer heard his laughter, and instead he appeared extremely serious and lost in thought. One day, as he was walking in the royal garden, a guard came to him and said in fear, "Prince, for the past few days I have seen the spirit of the king wandering the palace. Although it hasn't spoken to anyone, it seems to be searching for something." This news astonished Hamlet. The spirit of his father was still present in the palace. He was both pleased and puzzled by this. Slowly, he became convinced that his father's spirit was looking for him. He decided to meet his father's spirit. That night, he went with the guards to the place where his father's spirit had been seen wandering. He didn't tell anyone else about this. At midnight, with sleep far from his eyes, Hamlet stood ready. A guard whispered, "Look, Prince, there is your father's spirit on the platform." Hamlet quickly turned to look. A shadow in royal attire was slowly approaching him. From its walk and attire, Hamlet recognized that it was his father's spirit. It was wearing the same clothes his father had worn at the time of his death. Under the moonlight, Hamlet could see the figure clearly. He rushed towards it, calling, "Father!" The guards tried to stop him, but he freed himself and continued forward. When he was only a few steps away, the shadow motioned for him to walk to a secluded corner. For a moment, Hamlet was drenched in sweat. He thought, could it be a different spirit pretending to be my father? Could it harm me? But then his inner voice calmed him. Prince, don't doubt. There is no need to fear. This is your father. Hamlet's fear subsided, and he followed the shadow to a quiet corner. The shadow looked around to ensure no one else was near, then spoke, "My son." Hearing his father's loving voice after such a long time, Hamlet's eyes filled with tears, and his throat choked. He wanted to rush to his father and hug him, but his father stopped him and said, "Calm yourself, my son. I am here not to embrace you, but to reveal the secret of my untimely death." The shadow then spoke, revealing, "My death was no accident. It was murder. I was poisoned by my own brother, Claudius." "Poisoned," Hamlet gasped. "But Claudius said you died from a serpent's bite." "No," the shadow replied, "I was murdered by Claudius. After finishing my daily work, I rested in the royal garden. He came to me while I was asleep and poured poisonous drops into my ear. The poison burned through my veins and my heart stopped." The ghost continued, "If you love me, my son, take revenge on Claudius. Only then will my soul find peace. Otherwise, I will remain trapped in this restless state." Hamlet, shaken, promised, "Father, Claudius took you from me. I will avenge your death. Until I do, I will not rest." "But remember, my son," the ghost cautioned, "forgive your mother. The wrong she has done will be punished by God." With these words, the ghost vanished, leaving Hamlet alone. He returned to his room deeply moved. Determined to fulfill his promise and bring peace to his father's soul, Hamlet knew he had to proceed carefully. But he also realized that acting hastily could lead to failure. He decided to plan his actions meticulously. Hamlet, being a simple and straightforward person, could not plot anyone's murder, nor could he even speak ill of others. Moreover, Claudius's spies kept a close watch on him, which made Hamlet more cautious. To throw them off, he began to act mad. He pretended to be insane, making his movements and behavior appear erratic. This convinced everyone that he had lost his mind, and Claudius, thinking Hamlet no longer posed a threat, let his guard down. At court, there was a minister named Polonius who had a daughter, Ophelia. Hamlet loved her dearly, but Ophelia kept her distance from him. People speculated that Hamlet's apparent madness was due to unrequited love. Hamlet decided to use this to his advantage and wrote Ophelia a strange letter that seemed nonsensical to anyone who read it. It expressed his love for her and hinted at the cause of his madness. Ophelia showed it to her father, who then showed it to Claudius. This reassured Claudius, and he relaxed his vigilance, allowing Hamlet more freedom. Hamlet's plan was working, and he began to execute his strategy against Claudius. A traveling theatre troupe arrived in the city, and they performed a play that depicted a king's murder. The scene was so realistic that it moved the audience deeply. Hamlet decided to use this play to expose Claudius's guilt. Hamlet worked with the troupe to alter the play's plot, changing only the names of the characters. He then invited Claudius and the queen to watch the performance. During the scene where the king was poisoned, Claudius grew visibly uncomfortable. His face turned pale and his breath became shallow. He couldn't bear to watch, and soon he excused himself, signaling to the queen to leave as well. Hamlet had achieved his goal. He turned to his friend and said, "There's no doubt now. Claudius is the one who killed my father." His friend agreed, but Hamlet warned, "Keep quiet. Walls have ears. We will talk about this later." After the play, Hamlet knew he was one step closer to avenging his father's death. He prepared himself for the difficult path ahead, determined to make Claudius pay for his crimes. That same night, the queen, under the pretext of an urgent matter, summoned Hamlet to her chamber. Hamlet knew that after watching the play, Claudius would become even more cautious and start executing his schemes. Thus, when his mother called him to her chamber, he understood that the decisive moment was near. His resentment toward his mother deepened as she was siding with the murderer. But he recalled his father's words, resolving not to harm her under any circumstance. Controlling himself somehow, Hamlet entered the queen's chamber. She was standing by the window, looking out. Hearing his footsteps, she turned and addressed him. "Come, Prince, sit down." "Say what you need to, right here," Hamlet replied curtly. "Very well, Prince. What you are doing is wrong. Aren't you ashamed of acting against your father? Why are you doing this?" The queen's tone grew sharper this time. Hamlet realized that she was referring to Claudius. Bitterness welled up within him, and he retorted sharply, "Which father are you speaking of? The one who truly was my father, or the one pretending to be my father?" The queen stepped closer and said, "I am talking about King Claudius. He is your father now." Hearing Claudius being referred to as father, Hamlet's face flushed with rage. Spitting out words like fire, he exclaimed, "Claudius can never be my father. He is the murderer of my late father. Before calling that viper my father, my tongue would burn. My sword thirsts for his blood. I will not rest until I send that sinner to his grave." Seeing Hamlet's fierce demeanor, the queen began trembling in fear. She felt as if the late king himself stood before her. Taking a few steps back, she turned quickly to leave the room. But Hamlet blocked her way and said sternly, "Mother, before you leave, you must answer one question, or I won't let you go. I am your mother. Aren't you ashamed to speak to me like this? I'm leaving now. Let's see what you can do about it." With that, she stepped forward, but Hamlet grabbed her hand. Despite her efforts to free herself, she failed. Already terrified by his furious face, her courage completely deserted her as he restrained her. She screamed for help, and just then, a man's voice echoed from behind the curtain, crying for help. And Claudius, who had been hiding behind the curtain, was overhearing their conversation. Thinking he was calling for guards to protect the queen, Hamlet drew his sword, released the queen, and approached the curtain. Without pulling it aside, he thrust his sword through it. A cry pierced the air, followed by the sound of a body falling, and then silence. Hamlet was sure he had killed the man hiding behind the curtain. Curious to see who it was, he moved forward and pulled the curtain aside. There, lying lifeless, was Ophelia's father, a confidant of Claudius who had been eavesdropping on their conversation at the king's behest. A sigh of regret escaped Hamlet's lips. "Unknowingly, I have killed him. Ophelia will never forgive me for this." He then turned to the queen. Seeing the blood-stained sword in his hand, the queen appeared as though she might faint. Hamlet lowered the sword, placed his hands gently on her shoulders, and said in a tender voice, "Mother, you have nothing to fear from me. I am your son. I was born from your womb. I still honor you as I always have. But mother, it is true that Claudius murdered the king. His hands are stained with royal blood. He married you to usurp the throne. By supporting such a sinner, you are bringing disgrace upon our family." Hearing this, the queen averted her eyes in shame. She had nothing to say. Hamlet lifted her face and pointed to a portrait of the king on the wall. "Look, mother, father is looking at us with eyes full of hope. He seeks vengeance against his murderer. He wants us to punish Claudius together. Will you help me in this?" Moved by her son's affectionate words, tears filled the queen's eyes, and maternal love surged within her. She embraced her son. Consoling her, Hamlet said, "Do not worry, mother. I will ensure that Claudius pays for his sins. I just need your blessing so that I can..." At that moment, a voice completed his sentence. "Avenge your father's murder." Startled, Hamlet turned toward the source of the voice. There stood the spirit of his father. Overwhelmed with joy, Hamlet exclaimed, "Father, you've come back, father?" The king's spirit, in a calm voice, said, "Son, I am here to remind you of your duty. Do you remember your vow, prince? You must avenge my murder at the hands of Claudius." "Father, I could never forget. I am willing to sacrifice my life to fulfill my vow. He must face the consequences of his sins." Hamlet responded passionately, "Remember, son, as long as Claudius lives, my soul will not find peace. I will remain a wandering spirit until vengeance is served." With these words, the spirit disappeared. The queen, baffled, alternated her gaze between her son and the spot where he was addressing the spirit. She neither saw anything nor heard a voice, yet she felt a chilling presence that made her shiver. Hamlet knew she was oblivious to the spirit's presence, so he chose not to explain. Instead, he simply said, "Mother, beware of Claudius. A man who can commit one murder will not hesitate to commit another. If he learns you are siding with me, he won't spare your life. Be cautious in whatever you do." With that, he left the chamber. Claudius, informed of the mother-son meeting by his spies, decided to send Hamlet abroad the very next day. The next morning, Claudius summoned Hamlet and, in a harsh tone, said, "Prince, last night you killed my most senior and loyal minister, creating a crisis for us. This incident has sparked anger and discontent among the people. It is best that you leave this place for a while. I have made all the arrangements. Once things settle down here, you can return." With that, he forcibly sent Hamlet on a ship abroad, accompanied by 2 trusted officers who had secret orders to kill him during the journey. But as fate would have it, the ship was attacked by pirates en route. A fierce battle ensued, killing both officers. The pirate leader, who recognized Hamlet, treated him with respect and sent him back to Denmark. Upon his return, Hamlet received devastating news. Ophelia, unable to bear the shock of her father's death, had taken her own life. Her funeral was taking place as Hamlet arrived. This news shattered him. Like a madman, he rushed to where Ophelia's body lay. Her brother was preparing for her burial. At that time, Claudius, the queen, and other courtiers were present at the funeral. Hamlet pushed through the crowd and threw himself over Ophelia's body, weeping bitterly. Her brother, initially stunned, suddenly recalled that Hamlet was responsible for their father's murder and, indirectly, Ophelia's death. He attacked Hamlet, kicking and punching him. Seeing Hamlet being beaten, Claudius silently rejoiced. He hoped that the thorn named Hamlet would be removed from his path today. But some courtiers intervened, separating the two. Ophelia's brother then addressed Claudius, "Your Majesty, he killed my father. Because of him, my sister took her life. He destroyed my family. I demand the right to punish him myself. Your accusations are entirely valid, but that does not mean you should punish him like this. I decree a duel between you two. Only the victor will have the right to live," Claudius declared, smiling slyly. Behind this decree lay Claudius's cunning mind. He knew Hamlet, compared to Ophelia's brother, was still young and inexperienced. He wouldn't stand a chance. Although duels typically used fake swords, Claudius gave Ophelia's brother a real poison-tipped sword. If Hamlet survived, Claudius had another scheme ready, a royal goblet filled with poisoned wine, which he would offer as a prize to the duel's victor. Even the queen was unaware of this plot. The duel began at the scheduled time, drawing the entire city to the arena. Initially, Hamlet gained the upper hand over Ophelia's brother, but gradually his opponent began landing blows, eventually delivering a fatal strike. Hamlet, despite trying to defend himself, was wounded. As the poison spread through his body, he felt an intense burning sensation. Realizing Claudius's treachery, he resolved to fulfill his vow before dying. With great effort, he seized the poisoned sword and drove it into his opponent's chest. Grabbing the bloodied sword, he turned toward Claudius. Seeing his menacing approach, the queen, in panic, picked up the royal goblet and drank the poisoned wine. The poison quickly took effect, and she collapsed in agony. Witnessing his mother's painful death, Hamlet was reminded of his father's demise. The sinner had subjected him to a similar fate. Gathering all his strength, Hamlet approached the throne. Claudius tried to flee, but it was too late. Hamlet plunged the sword into his chest. Claudius screamed in agony before falling to the ground, lifeless. Hamlet's face showed a mix of contentment and relief. He had avenged his father's murder and could now die in peace. With Claudius's death, he believed his father's soul was finally free. Shortly afterward, Hamlet too succumbed to his injuries, ending the tragic saga. Thank you for joining us on this journey through words and wonder. Until our next tale, stay curious and keep dreaming.